Yes, friends. Welcome back on a Thursday. This is OGP, the One Giant Podcast. As you can tell, I am one of your hosts, Andy Mackiewicz. Unfortunately, usually the healthy, wealthy, dependable, reliable Adam Armbrecht is under the weather today. We've had a little bit of difficulties with both of us being under the weather, but we know we got to give the listeners what they want. And so we are giving it back to you today. We're going to do a quick one. We're going to do a little bit of a recap of OTAs, minicamp. And honestly, I think this is just a good one where Adam isn't dominating the show. I can come in and I can say the 5 things I think, after we watch both the OTAs and the minicamps. And so while there's a lot of other stories out there at the moment, Golden Tate playing baseball, Eli Manning talking with Cam Newton, and also talking about his 5 go-to weapons that he would want in a 2-minute drill. I wanted to bring it back to this year's team, the players that are on the roster, and think about after seeing OTAs, after seeing minicamp, after seeing what this team looks like, even in a few 11-on-11 practices and some contact drills and different things. What are the things that I come away thinking about? And the easiest way to start this all off is, doesn't this just feel different? Listen, I know last year when we had Joe Judge, or even in his first year, people got excited about Joe Judge being out there. There's that famous video of him diving on the ball into the mud and the team rallying around him. But even we mentioned it before, the media wasn't on board with this at all. They were not excited. They were not happy to see uh, Joe Judge out there making veterans run laps, doing these different drills. And they said his hard-nosed approach wouldn't work. And, as Giant fans like myself, we gave him the benefit of the doubt. We said maybe this team needs a little discipline. Things were going off the rails. Players were making comments, under Pat Shermer and Ben McAdoo and others. It just ended up not working. And I think really it was the results on the field and the conservative play calling, not necessarily the hard-nosed coaching, that was the ultimate demise for Joe Judge. When you look at what's happening with Brian Daboll, and you even feel it a little bit with Joe Shane, you feel like there's a changing of a guard. And I wouldn't necessarily call Daboll a full players coach, but you can see he's out there to have fun. He talks about wanting Daniel Jones to make mistakes. He wants to see what his team can do, and he's really bringing team community into this. I think it really does start from the top, though, with Joe Shane, knowing that he decided to pick Brian Daboll as his head coach after seeing how he operated the offense in Buffalo. And for me, it just feels completely different. And that's the tough part, is that I think that there's more than one way to be successful in this league. I don't necessarily know how this is all going to play out, but I'm already getting good vibes from everything that Brian Dable showing up and showing out. You see him even supporting the Rangers at hockey games. He's really getting into it and embracing the head coach of the New York Giants. You look at his fit and his drip. He's wearing Jordans during press conferences. This may not mean much, but if the players are buying into him being one of them, and they want to jump through, go through a brick wall for him, I think that can lead to success later on. So my first observation through OTAs and minicamp is that Joe Shane had to make corrections to this roster to fix problems that the previous regime had, or else they would still be here. And that Brian Daboll was saying, I can only coach one way, and it's just being authentic and being genuine. And the players have responded tremendously to that. The biggest takeaway that I have from all this is seeing all the red jerseys that are around minicamp. And I thought to myself, wow, that is a lot of players that are either hurt, not participating because they're veterans, maybe had a tweak here or there. But injuries really seem to be the thing that are going to be holding the fate of the Giants. You look at season-ending injuries to guys like Nick Gates, who had a gruesome injury that obviously won't be out there for the Giants anytime soon. You have Shane Lemieux coming back now, potentially starting at the left guard position, had a season-ending injury after I think about 17 snaps last year. You look at Sterling Shepard getting hurt. You look at Blake Martinez getting hurt early. All of these guys are trying to make their way back, and with the exception of Gates, look to be contributors fairly early on in this season. And then you think about guys that have injury histories that were dinged up and at least missed a few different games. I'm looking directly at you, Kenny Galladay. I'm looking at Darius Slayton. I'm looking at Andrew Thomas's ankle injury. And I'm looking at one Daniel Jones, who, because of injuries, is now listed as one of the top bets for comeback player of the year at 9-1, if you can believe that. But injuries really are going to dictate where this team goes during this season. I keep thinking about it. If Daniel Jones can stay upright, then I think he's going to have a good year. Adam agrees with me. He doesn't know whether or not it's going to be enough for him to be on this team long term, but I think we both agree that if he has time to throw, he can be a decent quarterback in this league. Andrew Thomas showed that he had a couple of ankle injuries. The team and the offensive line was terrible. They were even worse without him. Without Shane Lemieux, it was a rotating, open door on who was going to be starting at left tackle after moving Will Hernandez to the right. Um, and you talk about Kenny Galladay, the big offseason free agent signing, just wasn't able to stay healthy. Kadarius Toney had his issues as well. And so in camp, I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing all of these different red jerseys of people that are not participating now. And I think someone in the comments mentioned that too. Like, what if this is the team that you see and you're not going to see some of those guys out there? That's actually the biggest worry for me going into this. I think the Giants are going to be very competitive in the NFC East if we have at least 85% of the roster healthy. Not necessarily saying everyone's going to be out there. Because look, we know that there are going to be injuries across the season. Someone's going to get an ankle injury, someone may have a concussion. People are going to be out for 1 or 2 games. That you can deal with potential depth that you have at different positions. What we can't have is all these season-ending injuries and guys constantly hurt and not being able to see what the full offense or defensive scheme can look like. So for me, I think the Giants have enough talent. As I mentioned before, it's all going to be about health. And when we talk about that health, I think it's going to be refreshing because I think there's going to be a creative offense for once. It just feels that way under Mike Kafka. It feels that way under Brian Daboll. And it feels like the last couple of years under Jason Garrett was the most conservative play calling you could ever imagine. And, I've talked to Cowboy fans before, teams that follow the team. When Jason Garrett came over, I said, well, what can we expect? They said, you can expect literally the most conservative play call ever. But, don't turn the ball over. Try to manufacture yards, get as close as you can, and just try to take points. You can tell that this offense is going to be completely different. When you have Mike Kafka coming from one of the most explosive offenses in the Kansas City Chiefs, you have Brian Daboll being the offensive coordinator underneath Josh Allen, who had that shootout memorable playoff game against those Kansas City Chiefs. You can really think about how creative this offense can be and how dynamic this offense can be. And listen, while maybe we don't have a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, we do have positional pieces on the field that I think can cause defenses problems. You look at one of the things that Mike Kafka said recently. He said, I don't want to put any players in boxes. I want to be able to give them the flexibility to be able to move around the field and go where we need to go. That's refreshing, knowing that you're going to see Wan'Dale Robinson in different positions. You're going to see Kadarius Toney all over the field. But I think the biggest takeaway from minicamp and OTAs is they're actually trying to utilize Saquon Barkley in the right space. We talk about all the injuries and him banging into the line 25 times and trying to be a power runner. That's not how you take advantage of his explosiveness and his athleticism. It's all going to be getting him the ball in space, quick outs, one-on-one matchups where he can beat a nickel corner or he can beat a linebacker, as opposed to having to go up against a 375-pound defensive lineman or defensive tackle. And so when I think about all this creativity, we already know about Daboll talking about wanting Jones to be more aggressive. We heard for years the best thing to utilize Daniel Jones is to figure out how he cannot turn the ball over. And you could see Daniel Jones was holding the ball. He wasn't trying to throw balls into windows. He would take sacks. We really didn't have the ability to push the ball down the field. It feels like with Daboll saying, I want him to throw it, picks. I want him to throw it into tight windows in training camp and OTAs. He's basically saying, let's see what the limitations are, and then we can call plays from that. But I really like this approach of being able to see what you have on the field, be ultra aggressive, and dictate what the defense is bringing to you, as opposed to you having to sit back and try to figure out how you're going to stop some of this pass rush with a depleted offensive line. And when you talk about that creative offense, I think you're actually going to see a better offense because the offensive line is so much more improved. Pro Football Focus recently just came out and ranked the Giants offensive line 18th in the league. And you may say, oh, well, that's below average. Well, compared to where we were the last 2 years, it's going to be that much better being 18th. And I think Evan Neal is going to perform admirably, even though he is a rookie at right tackle. I think Andrew Thomas is a top 10 left tackle in this entire league. I think that Feliciano has had his struggles, but I think he's a better situation in the center position than say Billy Price. And I think adding Glowinski, who is performed very well for the Indianapolis Colts last year, and having a position battle between Shane Lemieux and Joshua Zudu, that offensive line allows the creativity behind them, whether it be with Daniel Jones, whether it give us time to get the ball down the field to someone like Kenny Galladay, or getting creative looks in matchups with motion around people like Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Saquon Barkley. So for me, it's going to be refreshing to see our offense not be scared to move the ball down the field because they're afraid of pressure, and see them try to bring it to these defenses and actually dictate how things are going to go. And that brings me to my fourth point. And that fourth point is the Wink Martindale scheme, and that is to co-dictate everything to those offenses. So as you said, Wink has been in press conferences saying, I don't want to have to game plan for 5 days straight and be back on my heels for all the creative things that an offense can do. And some of these great quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers. What I want to do is I want to speed up the game. I want to give them exotic looks, and I want to get the most pressures I can. He said the more times that the quarterback ends up on their back, the better it is for our team. And you can tell that there's a different swagger and a different confidence in this defense. You hear Leonard Williams talking about being able to drop back and pass. You see with the addition of someone like Kayvon Thibodeau, you can see that there is a little bit of swagger on this defense. In the first mandatory minicamp day, obviously the defense got the better of the offense. Those are the types of things you should expect early on because it's easier to get pressure. The team isn't a full unit yet on offense. You can just have these different blitzes. But I really think that you're seeing Wink Martindale's system come alive right now. And they've been able to add strategic pieces to this defense to be able to utilize exactly what he wants to do. We've mentioned before ad nauseum that we think Dane Belton has an opportunity to start quickly in this defense. He may be able to even take over Julian Love week 1 for the safety position alongside Xavier McKinney. And the reason why is because he can get to the quarterback. He allows a more diverse look from the safety position with all the different blitzing that he can do. He can drop back in coverage, but he has the ability to get to the quarterback. He's ultra fast, he's quick, and he can bring the thump when he gets to the quarterback. And that's really what Wink is asking him to do. He had 2 back-to-back, what would have been sacks in one of the mandatory minicamps. Everyone's saying that he's looking good, he's looking great. I am excited to see Dane Belton, but I'm also excited to see how they end up setting up this defensive front into the linebacking position when you have formidable pass rushers like Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau on each side of the ball. I honestly think that, with who we had like Lorenzo Carter and others over the course of the last few years, you've seen about 80% of what Leonard Williams could be because he does absorb some double teams. He does have to get pressure right up through the gut. Imagine allowing him to be able to scheme and pick out where he wants to be able to get into which hole and be able to get after the quarterback. I think you're going to see a resurgence in Leonard Williams. I think Dexter Lawrence is going to look better. I know people have been up and down on what he can be. Put him in the nose tackle position, give him one job and one job only, and tell him to do what he needs to do best. But I think about all these exotic looks and the types of players that they've brought in for this. You look at Darian Beavers potentially being there. You look at Micah McFadden potentially being there. We have Ellerson Smith coming back. It just looks like there's going to be a whole new level of aggression on this defensive front that I am really excited to see. A couple of years ago, we weren't that far away from being a top 10, top 12 defense. And then last year, I think the offense really kind of put a damper on that, kind of always playing from behind. It's tough for the defense to do that. We let up so many points in the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half that it just wasn't the right defense. Something looked off. It feels like this aggressive style that Wink is going to put forward is really complementing the players that they've brought in. And a guy like Cordell Flott is exactly the type of guy that is rangy, athletic, and can play multiple positions and potentially create havoc for quarterbacks. So the last thing that I'm thinking about is in camp, there feels like there is a lot of position battles, but also roster battles. So when we talk about position battles, there's a few that come to my mind. The first one is that cornerback position opposite of Adoree Jackson. We don't really know who it's going to be yet. It seems like Aaron Robinson has the inside track to replace James Bradbury right now. But there are other candidates that we haven't necessarily seen get a full look, whether it's because Cordell Flott has been playing in the slot a little bit more, whether it's Darnay Holmes potentially being out there but not getting all the reps that we've seen, whether it's someone like Rodarius Williams. We haven't fully seen exactly what that second cornerback position is going to be. I think that's something that you're going to actually want to keep an eye on as we get into training camp and we get into the preseason games. I really think it's a coin flip, but as I've said before, any avid listeners of the show know that I am very big on Rodarius Williams. I think he has that a little bit more size than someone like Darnay Holmes. I think he's got some speed. He's got an enormous wingspan, which really helps. And I think he has the ability to create more looks for Wink Martindale alongside of Adoree Jackson. So don't be surprised if Rodarius Williams gets healthy and he's a name that you end up hearing. The other position battle, we just talked about it, was the safety position. We know that Wink Martindale loves to play cover one and bring all these exotic looks with a lot of different players standing up in the linebacking and defensive line positions to give the quarterback fits. Xavier McKinney is the perfect safety to be able to kind of sit back and cover one and cover everything when needed. Now, when they're playing cover two, who's going to be that safety that's alongside of him? Most people think it's Julian Love. He's a veteran. He's been here. He has contributed in a bunch of different phases. I actually think Julian Love's best ability on this defense is going to be his versatility. I think in a pinch, you saw him line up at the linebacking position as opposed to just sitting back there at safety. We've already seen him play the safety position. We've already seen him play the cornerback position. We've seen him play the nickel cornerback position in the slot. We've seen the ability for Julian Love to move around the field. I could actually see a lot more of Julian Love moving around the field as opposed to just sticking him back in the safety. I think Dane Belton fits perfectly alongside Xavier McKinney for what Wink wants to do. And so those are two places I think that are going to be something to look at during training camp on the defensive side of the ball. On the offense, I think it starts with the left guard position. You have Shane Lemieux coming off of an injury. You have him coming back. People are saying he looked better in camp last year. He looked better in the limited snaps he had in game one in terms of his blocking and ability to hold down that position. I think Joshua Zudu, when Andrew Thomas comes back fully at left tackle, will really push Shane Lemieux for that left guard spot. And it's nice to have Zudu have that versatility where he can back up either the left guard or left tackle in a pinch. But really, the Giants moved up further to get Zudu than most people had them on their boards. And so that was something that Joe Shane seemed to recognize is we like guys for what we're trying to do in our scheme. And Azudu just feels like one of those guys where Shane Lemieux, a late round pick from the previous regime, may have a leg up as a veteran. But I think because Azudu was chosen by Joe Shane, he has an opportunity to start. So the two people that I think are most surprising would be, don't be surprised if Dane Belton and Joshua Azudu have an opportunity to start week one or get some significant snaps early on in the season. The wide receiver room to me is the other thing in terms of position battles that I find fascinating. We don't know necessarily when we're going to see Sterling Shepard on the field. That's a huge question mark of when he comes back and what his role is going to be. You have guys that can play the slot like Kadarius Toney. You have guys that can play the slot like Wan'Dale Robinson. And there's a few other players like Richie James that's been out there before during some of these OTAs. I'm interested to see what this is going to look like week one, because if Sterling Shepard is healthy, I don't even know exactly what a 3 wide receiver set would look like for the Giants. They also are talking about wanting to get Saquon Barkley out in space and having him line up potentially in the slot. There's a lot of different looks that the Giants could give there, and it all depends on some of the health of Sterling Shepard, how they want to utilize Wan'Dale Robinson, how they want to utilize Kadarius Toney, and whether Darius Slayton is going to make this roster. And that kind of goes into the roster and positional battles. It felt weird to see the production that Darius Slayton has had for the Giants over the last few seasons and have him kind of on the fringe of making this roster. But knowing that you save $2.5 million on the cap and you have this, abundance of wide receivers behind him that may be able to fill in. You have the Colin Johnsons, the Richie Jameses, the Robert Fosters. They brought in Keelan Doss recently. There's a whole host of players that they could bring in, save about $2 million off the cap if they feel that they bring a different positional versatility rather than just top line speed down the side. Now, I think there's no reason for the Giants to outright release someone like Darius Slayton right now. They're 6.5 million under the cap. Everything seems healthy. We may as well see early on in training camp if some of these other guys are fighting for that fourth wide receiver spot that Darius Slayton seems to own right now. And what I found fascinating was it seems like Darius Slayton has been running with the twos rather than the ones in some of these mini camp drills. And while Daboll and Kafka say you shouldn't read into that very much, how can you not? Right? Like it's clear that who the offensive linemen are that are running with the ones. It's clear who the cornerbacks are running as the ones. How are we not going to read into that into the wide receiver room? So don't be surprised. It depends how Darius Slayton looks. You've seen other wide receivers get traded, like Brian Edwards from the Raiders. Feels like a very similar position to Darius Slayton. They're going for fifth or sixth round picks for teams that are needing that depth piece at wide receiver. The Giants drafted Darius Slayton late. If they get a couple years of production out of him and get another fifth or sixth round pick out of it and save $2 million against the cap, it does feel like something that the Giants are going to lean towards. If I had to guess right now, my ultimate guess is that Darius Slayton won't be on the roster week 1, but that doesn't mean that if he is, that he can't contribute to this to this team and be someone in this wide receiver room if Sterling Shepard ends up on an IR that could contribute early on. And when we talk about some of the other roster spots, I really focus in on the linebacking position. It feels like there is a lot of holdovers in the linebacking position that may not have a spot when all the musical chairs settle at the end of training camp and we need the 53-man roster. We saw the first shoe drop with TJ Brunson. He was let go and released. So he's no longer on the team. He was a name that we had mentioned a few times to look at to see if some of these new guys are going to be pushing him out. There's other names like Cam Brown and Carter Coughlin. Do they have a role on special teams? Do they have enough? Have they shown enough at the linebacking position to be able to say they could play it in a pinch if someone gets hurt? What type of versatility do they see in those guys as opposed to someone like Talman Fox, who went undrafted that the Giants have signed? Bringing in a whole host of guys and having Ellerson Smith back, McFadden, Beavers, et cetera, you're really talking about reshaping this linebacking room in the vision of Wink Martindale. And that may just mean that Cam Brown and Carter Coughlin are two types of guys that we need to look out for that may not be here when it's all said and done. I talked about the secondary before. Darnay Holmes, if healthy, looks like he will make this roster because we do need this cornerback depth. But yeah, Julian Love, you save a couple of $1 million on. We talked about his versatility, being able to play multiple positions. If that's where they have him, I think he carves a rollout. If they have him in the secondary just playing safety, I think that's where a challenge comes in because Dane Belton, as we say, fits perfectly in Wink Martindale's system. And at the end of the day, look, we're not going to labor the point. I wanted to make sure the listeners heard my 5 thoughts before Adam corrupts your brain and makes you think about things completely differently. But at the end of the day, we are seeing a whole new offense that is going to be way more creative. We're seeing a whole new defense that is going to be wildly aggressive. We're going to see new stars at the right tackle with Evan Neal and at the edge rushing position with Kayvon Thibodeau. We're going to see explosive players like Wan'Dale Robinson and hopefully Kadarius Toney back here. There is a lot of things to get excited about ahead of training camp. A lot of position battles, a lot of potential roster change still between now and then. So there's a lot for everyone to think about. As always, you can follow us at One Giant Podcast. You can get the podcast wherever you get your podcast needs described. And because I don't have Adam here, as I like to always say, no matter what's going on, as always, let's go Big Blue.